As 2013 comes to a close, California may have seen one of the driest years on record. Wildfires flared across the state. Yet managing the state's water supply has long created controversy, pitting environmentalists, farmers, and voters against each other. This week, state officials released the latest plan for the Sacramento-San Joaquin River Delta. The Delta supplies drinking and irrigation water to much of the state. It's also home to beautiful wetlands and wildlife. The current $25 billion proposal, backed by Governor Brown, would build two massive tunnels to move water from the north to the state's more populous south. Proponents say it will also save the Delta's endangered species. But critics are calling the plan a costly water grab and have vowed to block it. Joining me now for a closer look are Lauren Sommer, KQED science reporter, and Paul Rogers, San Jose Mercury News environment writer. And Paul, let me begin with you. The draft plan was released this week. What are some of the key points and what has the reaction been like?
Well, the plan is pretty intimidating to a lot of people who are just sort of casual news observers. It's 34,000 pages. Now, that's, wow. You can't even get your mind around that. But it really boils down to a couple of basic facts in California. 2/3 of all the water, the rain and the snow, falls in the north. 2/3 of the people live in the south. And so for the last 75 years, we have basically figured out how do you move water from north to south. We've built the world's greatest system of dams, canals, and pumps. Right. And in doing so, we've allowed agriculture to bloom. California is the #1 ag state in the country. We've allowed Silicon Valley and Hollywood to bloom. And we've also had a big downside. We've killed a lot of the salmon. We've wiped out a lot of endangered species. We now take 50% of all the fresh water that flows into the Delta from rivers all over the state, from the melting Sierra snow, and we divert it to cities from San Jose all the way to Los Angeles and to all the farms. And this plan is an attempt to say, how do we make that water more reliable and also take it in a way that kills fewer fish? The idea is you build two huge tunnels, 30 to 35 miles long, 40 feet high, and you basically pump the water out from a different place. Instead of from giant pumps near Tracy in the south part of the Delta, which grind up and kill a lot of fish, they would take it further north near Sacramento. And that's the basic idea.
So what has the reaction been like, Lauren? How have environmentalists, for example, been responding?
Yeah, you might imagine this is a really controversial plan, and there's people all over the state, different constituencies that have very different takes on the whole thing. The big question about the environment is what's going to happen to these endangered fish species? The context is they've really taken a nosedive in the last few decades, and these fish, a lot of people are saying we've got to figure out a way to bring them back. So what will happen is that the wildlife agencies, federal and state, are going to have to look at this plan and say, well, what is this going to do? Is it going to hurt these fish or help them? They actually have to give a permit to this plan before it would ever get built. And the question right now is, well, is this going to take more water out of the ecosystem or is it going to take less water out of the ecosystem? If it takes more water, a lot of these environmentalists and some wildlife agencies are saying, you know what, that's not going to help these endangered fish. So how much water it takes is going to be a key question going forward.
You know, people often think that because of California's growing population, it's people who are sucking up all the water and needing all this water, but that's not really true.
No, it's a great question. You know, the old sort of saw in Northern California is that Southern California is taking all our water to water lawns in Hollywood. And in fact, farms in California use 80% of the water that people use in California.
80%?
80. We have 38 million people. And 10% of all the water goes to those 38 million people. Another 10% goes to all the businesses. 80% goes to the farms. So
and is that water used efficiently?
Well, it's in the eye of the beholder. The farmers say yes. A lot of environmental groups say no. Basically, there are plenty of places in California where the farmers have been conserving and using water efficiently. There's also a lot of places where they haven't put in drip irrigation. They haven't lined canals with clay to stop water evaporating. And, you know, they haven't managed their groundwater very well. All through the San Joaquin Valley, they're over pumping, and basically a lot of environmentalists are saying instead of this plan, what you should do is develop more local sources of water, more conservation, more recycled water, where you use treated wastewater to irrigate golf courses and things like that. But this has shaped up in the past to be a north-south water battle. We had the same kind of plan on the ballot in 1982 called the Peripheral Canal when Jerry Brown was governor before, and it failed because Northern California overwhelmingly voted no.
Well, I think what's interesting in the conversation this time around is people are really talking about climate change. We have the snowpack here in California. That's where our water comes from. And with climate change, we may not see the same snowpack that we're used to. So I think it's kind of been an interesting element in the conversation now as opposed to in the 80s, which is what's our water supply going to look like going forward, and will it be reliable?
And this system is massive. It serves millions of Californians. It sounds almost wonky, but because it serves so many people, is that why people should care? It directly affects people's lives.
Yeah, it's really hard to understand why this one little place plays such a pivotal role in the entire state. You know, I like to think of it as kind of a train system or a subway system. There are lines going all over the state, but it's really what happens in this central place that matters. And 2/3 of Californians gets at least some of their water from this place, including in the Bay Area.
So what happens if the tunnels aren't built? What happens with our current system?
Well, right now, the question about endangered species isn't just, environmentalists who like little fish that you haven't heard of wanting to save them. The Endangered Species Act is the most powerful federal environmental law in the United States. And basically you cannot kill endangered species. So if these pumps are grinding up salmon and smelt and other fish, and we're taking too much fresh water and disrupting the habitat, judges have ruled, and also federal agencies have ruled recently, that you can't pump as much water. So it's directly incumbent on the farmers in the cities to also figure out a way to not kill all these fish, because in the end, the Endangered Species Act is not going away. And if there isn't a plan, then it's probably going to result in less water being pumped out of the Delta. The fish may not recover. The question is, are there ways to use the water more efficiently? The other big question is, this is $25 billion. Who's paying for it, and how do you pay for it? Right now, they're still in the planning stages. Jerry Brown hopes to break ground in 2017, but none of the money is in hand. Zero of the $25 billion. Water districts in the Central Valley and the Bay Area would raise rates on ratepayers to pay 2/3 of it, and the rest would come from a state water bond or bonds and the federal government. But kind of like high-speed rail, they have none of it basically in hand.
High-speed rail, another boondoggle. I'm curious.
I didn't call it a boondoggle.
Okay, I did. I'm guilty of that. Well, you said 25 billion, but opponents are saying it may be more like 50 billion, the environmentalists, and they're already threatening lawsuits. Will this thing ever be built, do you think, or is it just going to be tied up in the courts for years and years and years?
If history is any indication, will it be more expensive? Will there be lawsuits? It might be a pretty safe bet to take. I mean, the state is in a really tough position because the water districts will be paying the $17 billion to actually build the tunnels, the construction costs. You know, they're going to want assurances. They're going to want a certain amount of water and to know that water is going to be delivered. And then you have these wildlife agencies, environmental groups saying, you know what, you can't take as much as you've been taking. So the real key question is, if any of these water districts or agencies say, there's no way we're going to put up this money if we get less water, and one pulls out, the whole thing may fall apart at that point.
And Governor Brown is pushing this really hard. His father, Pat Brown, when he was governor, started the State Water Project. Do you feel like Jerry Brown now feels like this is his mantle to carry the legacy forward? Yeah,
I think there are three reasons why he's pushing this so hard. The first is that he saw his father build big things, the state university system, the State Water Project, highways. And second is, a lot of people say California can't do big things anymore, and he wants to prove them wrong. Third, just in the political calculation, unions want this, just like they want the high-speed rail. There are thousands and thousands and thousands of jobs that would go for decades, and they're pushing hard for it. His biggest supporters are unions. They funded his campaign. They funded Prop 30, the tax that he put on the ballot a couple years ago. And in politics, they say, dance with who brung you.
And so what happens now? There's a public hearing period?
Public comments for the next 4 months.
Okay.
The state's going to look at all of those. They're going to do another draft, which maybe will be released in a year. And then all the permits start and all the other big questions. So it's a really long road from here. And
environmentalists will certainly sue and probably put it on a state ballot to try to block it as well. And you're going to hear the echoes of 1982, North versus South, in that state ballot. The question is, the people who want this have a lot of money, and they'll try to get it through.
All right, we'll see what happens. And I have a feeling we're going to hear more and more about it in 2014, well after the holidays. All right, thank you both to Lauren Sommer and to Paul Rogers.